My friends, this is Scarlet Veil, and today I'm telling you a story that still makes my skin crawl. Because there is an annoying neighbor, and then there is the kind of man who parks across your driveway like he pays your mortgage, throws his garbage into your flowers, and somehow still acts offended when you dare to object. Tell me something honestly, how long would you stay polite before you snapped? This story is about a woman named Mara Ellison, who wanted one very ordinary thing: to leave her own house without negotiating with a smug man in boat shoes and a superiority complex. But that was not enough for her neighbor. He wanted her space, her patience, and eventually her silence. And the worst part? For a while, he almost got it. But stay with me, because the ending on this one is deeply satisfying, cold in all the right places, and yes, it comes with a tow truck. So before we dive in, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, drop a comment telling me what you would have done, and send this story to that friend who has met at least one entitled menace disguised as just a neighbor. Mara had not bought a dream house. She had bought a quiet one. That mattered more. After almost a decade of apartment living, thin walls, stomping upstairs neighbors, and one landlord who treated repairs like moral weakness, quiet had become almost luxurious. The little house on Alder Creek Lane was not glamorous. It had a narrow drive, a front yard the size of a large rug, and a porch that leaned ever so slightly when the weather turned damp. But it had a blue front door, decent light in the mornings, and a strip of dirt along the fence where Mara planned to grow things she could keep alive. That, for her, was enough to call a life. She worked from home most days, editing corporate copy and packaging other people's ideas in clean language they could sell to investors. It paid the bills, and more importantly, it let her build her days around her Aunt Celia, who had been in and out of medical appointments for the better part of a year. Celia was not helpless, and she hated being treated that way. But she had slowed down. Her breathing tired more easily. Some mornings her joints argued with her before her feet hit the floor. Mara had become, without ceremony, the person who drove, organized, remembered, and stayed calm in waiting rooms designed to smell like old magazines and disinfectant. The house gave them both some relief. Celia liked the kitchen window. Mara liked the yard. She planted lavender first because it survived neglect and still smelled like a clean lie. Then she added rosemary, white begonias, 2 clumps of catmint, and a narrow stone border. She laid herself on a Saturday afternoon while her shoulders burned and her phone buzzed unanswered inside. The first time she saw the trash in the flower bed, she thought a raccoon had dragged it there. A crushed takeout container. A paper cup with melted ice in the bottom. A greasy napkin half buried under the catmint. It was gross, but not dramatic. She cleaned it up, muttered something unkind to the air, and moved on. The first time she found Grant Mercer's truck blocking her driveway, she told herself the same thing. Probably temporary. Probably careless. Probably one of those irritating little things that feel bigger because they happen before coffee. Grant lived across from her, one house over and slightly uphill, where the curb widened just enough for him to believe the street had been designed around his preferences. He was one of those men who always looked freshly rehearsed. Crisp polo shirts. Hair held in place by effort and product. Mirrored sunglasses even when the sky looked undecided. He drove a huge charcoal pickup truck that seemed to exist mostly to announce itself. Not scratched, not dusty, not used in any meaningful way. Just large, polished, and in love with being seen. He lived there with his wife, Brooke, and a daughter who looked about 16 and wore the exhausted expression of a teenager already fluent in adult embarrassment. When Mara moved in, Grant had been all smiles. Offered a handshake. Asked what she did. Commented on the neighborhood. Told her, in that charming manufactured tone some men mistake for charisma, that everyone on the lane looked out for each other. My friends, whenever a man says that too early, watch your wallet and your boundaries. The morning of the first driveway incident, Mara had a video call with a client she absolutely could not miss. Not because the client was brilliant, but because people with large budgets tend to confuse urgency with importance and late arrivals with disrespect. She opened the garage, stepped into her car, backed halfway down, and stopped. Grant's truck was stretched across the mouth of her driveway at an angle so precise it almost felt personal. Not fully parallel to the curb. Not fully parked. Just enough in the way to make the exit impossible unless her plan for the day involved scraping her car down the side of his. She stared for a second, genuinely confused by the audacity of it. Then she got out, walked across the street, and rang his bell. No answer. She rang again. Nothing. When she was about to give up and call a rideshare, Grant appeared from his side gate with a mug in one hand and that cheerful blankness on his face men wear when they know exactly what they are doing and want the other person to feel silly for noticing. "Oh," he said. "Were you trying to get out? Were you trying to get out?" As if she had opened her garage for spiritual ventilation. Mara kept her tone flat and asked him to move his truck. Grant laughed softly, like she was adorable for needing access to her own driveway, and ambled over without urgency. He climbed into the truck, adjusted his seat, checked his phone, then finally pulled forward. "Sorry," he called through the open window. "Just unloading for a second." A second. It had been almost 10 minutes. That should have been the moment she understood him. Instead, she did what decent people so often do with indecent behavior. She made excuses for it. The truck showed up in front of her driveway again 2 days later. Then again on Friday. Then twice the next week. Sometimes Grant was dropping something off. Sometimes he was waiting on a package. Sometimes he was right there. He loved that phrase. Right there. As if physical proximity transformed obstruction into a courtesy. As if being nearby canceled the fact that he had blocked someone else's exit. Mara tried the calm route. She spoke to him once more in person. She sent a general message in the neighborhood group chat asking everyone to avoid blocking driveways. She adjusted her schedule on days Celia had appointments. She even parked farther down the drive in case an extra few inches would help. Nothing changed. Actually, no. That was not true. Something did change. Grant got bolder. A week after the second blocked exit, the neighborhood chat lit up with one of his messages. Friendly reminder that community living requires flexibility. Small inconveniences happen. Let's all give each other grace. Small inconveniences. That line sat on Mara's screen like grease. Because what made him dangerous was not volume. He was not a screamer. He was not openly aggressive. He operated in that more infuriating register of smug civility, where the person doing the harm speaks like a motivational calendar while quietly making your life more difficult. And then the trash became a pattern. It started with food containers, then beer cans, then cigarette butts in the soil near her begonias. Once, an entire plastic grocery bag split open under the porch hydrangea, leaking coffee grounds and old takeout sauce into the mulch. Another morning, she found a stack of used napkins, a cracked lid, and a chicken bone nestled between the stones she had laid by hand. She cleaned all of it. At first. Then she started photographing it. At first because she was angry. Then because anger, if it has any survival instinct at all, eventually turns into record-keeping. It was Celia who first said what Mara did not want to say aloud. "That is not random," she murmured one morning, standing at the kitchen window with her tea untouched. "That man is doing it on purpose." Mara did not answer right away. Not because she disagreed. Because once a thing has a clear name, it becomes harder to live beside. On the following Thursday, she had proof. The camera she installed under the porch Eve caught Grant walking past the yard with a white foam container in one hand and his truck keys in the other. He glanced toward Mara's windows, not casually, but directly. Then he flicked the container into her flower bed with the ease of a man dropping junk mail. He did not hurry. He did not hesitate. He just kept walking. Mara watched the clip once, twice, then 3 times, her mouth going cold. By the 4th viewing, rage had settled into something far more useful. Stillness. She saved the video in 2 folders, emailed it to herself, created a document with dates, times, and notes, added photos of the trash, added screenshots from the group chat, added photos of the truck blocking the drive, added call logs, added everything. No dramatic confrontation. No yelling in the street. No performance. Just evidence, layered carefully, like a wall built brick by brick around the truth. You know what people like Grant count on? Not fear, exactly. Exhaustion. They count on the other person deciding it is too petty, too annoying, too embarrassing, too socially awkward to pursue. They rely on decent people having jobs, doctor visits, migraines, responsibilities, grief, and better things to do than prove a fully grown man is acting like a raccoon with a mortgage. Mara understood that now. And she also understood something else. If she reacted too early, he would call her unstable. If she reacted emotionally, he would call her dramatic. If she reacted publicly before she had enough, he would dress himself up as the calm one and let her look frayed. So she waited and documented. The neighborhood began noticing more than he realized. Mr. Keene from the corner house mentioned offhand that Grant seemed to use whoever's curb is closest whenever he did not feel like parking properly. A woman named Lorna, who lived 2 doors down, quietly told Mara that she had once seen fast food wrappers blow out of Grant's truck bed and into someone else's hedge while he pretended not to notice. No one was ready to accuse him of anything big. Not yet. But the surface polish had started to dull. The next escalation came on a Saturday. Mara had spent almost the entire day repairing the front bed after a hard rain. She reset the border stones, replaced 2 crushed plants, spread fresh bark, and bought a narrow black iron bench she found at a salvage store across town. Celia sat on the porch with a blanket over her knees, offering occasional commentary and one extremely judgmental opinion about the quality of modern compost. By sunset, the little yard looked peaceful again. Soft, clean hers. The next morning, a torn garbage bag sat on the bench. Eggshells, greasy foil, coffee grounds, wilted lettuce. A banana peel draped over one armrest like an insult that had dressed for dinner. Mara stood on the front walk holding her keys, so tightly the metal dug into her palm. She did not cry. She did not swear. She did not march across the road and pound on Grant's front door. She simply stood there long enough for the truth to finish arranging itself inside her. She no longer wanted peace. She wanted consequence. The opening arrived 4 days later. Celia had a vascular skin scheduled at a clinic across town. It had already been rescheduled once because the machine had gone down, which is medical office language for we know your time matters, but not enough. The appointment was early. The traffic window was tight. The paperwork pile was stupid. Mara prepared the night before. Insurance card in the bag. Water bottle in the holder. Medication list printed. Car charged. Alarm set. She barely slept. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind that made every sound inside the house feel sharper. Mara helped Celia down the front step, settled her carefully in the passenger seat, folded the walker into the trunk, and opened the garage. Grant's truck was there. Not near the driveway. Across it. Full stop. Wider angle than before. Too, as though he had decided subtlety was no longer worth the effort. The nose of the truck cut across the curb line. The rear wheels sat just far enough into the apron that there was no exit path left at all. Celia looked at it through the windshield and went very quiet. Then she asked softly, again? Again. There are words that wound because they contain too much history in too few letters. Mara stepped out, took photographs from 3 angles, and recorded a short video with the time visible on the dash clock. Then she walked to Grant's door and rang the bell once. No answer. She called his phone. Declined. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a text. Your truck is blocking my driveway. I am taking my aunt to a medical appointment. You have already been warned about this. I am requesting removal. Delivered. Read. No reply. My friends, that was the moment he lost. Not when the truck was towed. Not when the neighbors watched. Not even when the group chat turned on him. He lost the moment he read that message and still decided she would wait. Because entitlement is really just stupidity with good posture. Mara called the number the neighborhood association manager had given her after reviewing the file. Her name was Ellen Ward, and she was one of those gloriously unromantic women who did not care for excuses packaged as misunderstandings. Mara had met with her the week before, carrying a binder full of screenshots, still images, incident notes, and the camera clip of Grant tossing trash into the yard. Ellen had said very little while reviewing it. Then she had looked up and said, "This is clear. Next time he blocks access, do not negotiate. Call." So Mara called. She reported a vehicle obstructing her private driveway. She stated there had been prior incidents. She provided the address. She sent the photos. She confirmed that she had a dependent adult with a medical appointment already in the car. Everything in her voice stayed level. No tears. No drama. No crack in the tone. A rideshare took her and Celia to the clinic because real life rarely pauses for justice to become cinematic. But before Mara climbed into the back seat, she looked once more at Grant's truck planted across her exit and felt something settle in her chest.
It was not joy. Not yet.
It was the clean feeling of a door locking behind a mistake someone else had chosen. Halfway to the clinic, Ellen texted, "They're on the way." Mara read it and stared out the window while traffic crawled past strip malls and wet sidewalks. Celia rested one hand over Mara's and gave it a quiet squeeze.
"You did right," she said.
And this time Mara believed her immediately. The clinic was cold, late, and packed with people pretending not to be frightened. Celia was called back after 40 minutes that felt like 4 hours. Mara stepped into the hallway, opened the security app on her phone, and saw the scene unfolding in grainy morning light. The tow truck was already in front of her house. One operator photographed Grant's truck from multiple angles. Another checked something on a tablet. The cable was out. And right on cue, here came Grant. He burst out of his front door with that exact enraged confusion entitled people wear when the universe abruptly stops deferring to them. Arms out, face flushed, mouth moving too fast. He stalked toward the operator, pointing, objecting, performing. Even without perfect audio, Mara could read the script. He was just there for a minute. He lived on the street. He never meant to block anyone. This was harassment. This was extreme. This was unnecessary. Then, because men like him lose all sense of proportion the second consequences arrive, he seemed to pivot into outrage about fairness. Fairness. As if fairness had not been parked under his tires for weeks. The operator did not argue. That is what made it beautiful. He did not care about Grant's tone. He did not care about Grant's self-image. He did not care that Grant was, in his own imagination, a reasonable man being mistreated by a difficult woman. He checked procedure. He attached the cable. He lifted the truck. And my friends, there is a special kind of music in the sound of a tow mechanism tightening around a man's arrogance. Half the block saw it. Do not let anyone tell you quiet neighborhoods do not have audiences. They absolutely do. They just hide them behind blinds and coffee mugs. That morning, curtains shifted all along Alder Creek Lane. A front door opened and stayed open. Somebody took an embarrassingly long time wheeling out their recycling bin. Someone else appeared to be watering the same patch of lawn with unusual commitment. Grant's truck rose. The street watched. His reputation did not survive the angle. When Mara and Celia returned hours later, the truck was gone. The space in front of the driveway looked almost surgical. Empty curb, wet pavement. No hulking machine arranged like a challenge. Celia leaned back in the rideshare and exhaled a laugh that was more relief than amusement. "Well," she said, "look at that." Mara smiled without meaning to.
Small. Sharp.
Earned. Grant, of course, did what men like Grant always do after public humiliation. He tried to control the narrative before the facts finished spreading. The neighborhood chat lit up by late afternoon. Completely unbelievable what happened today. I was treated like a criminal over a simple misunderstanding. We used to be able to talk things out like adults. Some people in this neighborhood are committed to conflict. And then, because hubris is a disease that lowers intelligence, he typed the line that destroyed him. I have never intentionally blocked anyone's driveway, and I have never disrespected any neighbor.
Oh, sweetheart. No.
Mara did not write an essay. She did not post a monologue. She did not perform wounded dignity. She uploaded one video. Grant in plain view, tossing takeout trash into her flower bed. Then she posted a still image of his truck across the driveway, timestamp visible. Then a second clip showing the truck parked there long enough to eliminate any claim of just passing through. Then she wrote one sentence. Since you stated publicly that this never happened, I am sharing a small portion of the documented record. The full file has already been submitted to the association. That was it. No adjectives. No insults. No explanation. Just a quiet blade slid under the ribs of a lie. The chat detonated. Not with screaming, which would have given Grant room to posture. With disappointment. That was worse. Lorna wrote that she was stunned. Mr. Keene said this explained several things. A woman Mara barely knew commented that she had seen the truck there repeatedly and had assumed there must be some arrangement. Another neighbor asked whether the police had been notified. Ellen stepped in with a kind of lethal professionalism manipulative people never see coming and informed the group that the association had already documented an ongoing pattern of obstruction and would be issuing a formal sanction. Formal sanction. Such elegant language for you arrogant idiot, it's on paper now. Grant tried deleting messages. Too late. Tried sending private clarifications. Too late. Tried the spectacularly pathetic angle that the trash had been a joke. A joke. That is the refuge of every coward caught doing something ugly on camera. That evening, around sunset, someone knocked on Mara's door. It was Brooke. Grant's wife looked exhausted in the way only chronic secondhand embarrassment can make a person look. Her mascara had smudged slightly at the corners, and she stood with both hands wrapped around each other so tightly it looked painful. She did not come to defend him. She did not come to ask for mercy. She said very quietly, I saw the videos. Mara waited. Brooke swallowed. You were not imagining any of it. There it was. No grand apology. No dramatic confession. Just one woman acknowledging another woman's reality after a man had tried to blur it into nothing. Then Brooke added, still staring somewhere near the porch rail rather than at Mara, he always thinks he can keep pushing if nobody stops him. At home too. And there, my friends, was the rotten center of the whole thing. Because the man who treats public boundaries like optional decor almost never saves his worst habits for strangers. He just wears a friendlier face outside. Mara did not invite Brooke in. She did not turn the moment into instant intimacy. She thanked her for being honest and wished her a good night. Sometimes the cleanest boundary is the one that refuses to become a rescue mission. The association meeting took place the following Tuesday. Grant arrived in a pressed button-down shirt, carrying a leather folio and the expression of a man convinced he could charm bureaucracy if he just used enough confident hand gestures. Mara almost admired the delusion. Almost. Ellen chaired the meeting with the emotional temperature of an invoice. She laid out the incident log, the still images, the camera footage, the prior warning, the group chat posts, and the report from the tow operator. Grant attempted every strategy in the entitled man playbook. He said the truck had not fully blocked the driveway. He said the trash video lacked context. He said the tension was personal, not factual. He said Mara could have simply talked to him like a neighbor. At that point, even old Mr. Keene, who looked like he had not raised his voice since the previous century, cut in and said, she did. Repeatedly. That little sentence landed like a brick. Grant shifted tactics and implied Mara was vindictive. Ellen asked whether vindictive people usually compiled dated records over several weeks before making one formal report. Grant had no useful answer. He made one last attempt to recast himself as the injured party, muttering something about how any man would be furious to see his truck taken like that. There it was. The masculine tragic opera of a man offended by consequences. Mara spoke only when asked. She summarized the pattern. She mentioned Celia's medical appointment. She identified the recurring trash. She clarified that she had requested help only after prior warnings failed. She did not dramatize. She did not embellish. She did not need to. The facts had already done the humiliating. The decision was immediate. The association upheld the sanction, documented the pattern as harassment through repeated obstruction and improper dumping, and made it clear that any further incident would be referred forward with the full existing file. Nobody applauded. Thank God. Applause would have cheapened it. Silence made him sit inside his own disgrace. That night Mara stood in the front yard with the hose in one hand and let water darken the soil around the roots. The begonias had recovered. The lavender still leaned slightly from the last storm, but its scent lifted as soon as the water hit. The little iron bench looked like it belonged there now instead of like a challenge waiting to be dirted. Across the street, Grant pulled into his own driveway with a rental sedan, his truck still not yet returned. He got out without his usual theatrical confidence. No sunglasses. No lazy smirk. No effortless ownership of the curb, the air, the block, the moment. He did not look toward Mara. She noticed and then immediately stopped caring. Because by then, what she wanted had shifted. She no longer needed him to feel bad. She needed him to understand that her life was no longer available for casual damage. If you've made it this far, support this story with a like. Because this is the point where so many people realize the real satisfaction was never just the tow truck. It was the timing, the evidence, the control, the refusal to melt down on cue. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Would you have called sooner, or would you have waited until he handed you the perfect moment like this? The piece did not return all at once. That would have been too clean. For a while Grant tried to salvage himself through volume. He spent phone calls on his porch speaking just a little too loudly about crazy people, overreactions, and how nobody can make one mistake anymore. But now the block had context, and context is fatal to men who survive on selective impressions. A few neighbors began greeting Mara more warmly. Not with pity, with respect. Lorna brought over lemon bars one afternoon and said, in a tone so casual it had clearly been rehearsed, "I'm glad somebody finally put a stop to him." Mr. Keene nodded at Mara over his hedge and said, "Good paperwork." Honestly, highest praise imaginable from a man like that. Celia recovered from the scan with her usual stubborn humor and immediately turned the tow event into folklore. By the end of the week, Mara heard her aunt telling the pharmacist that the truck went up like pride with a cable on it, which was, frankly, poetry. She told the story to her bridge group, to her sister on the phone, and to one poor cashier who had merely asked if she wanted a receipt. Mara let her. Some victories deserve witnesses. An email from the association arrived the following Friday with the meeting notes attached. Mara printed them and placed the pages in a folder with the rest of her record. Not because she expected trouble the next morning, because she had learned something deeply practical about people like Grant. They do not respect memory. They respect cost. Documentation makes you expensive to target. And sure enough, the visible behavior stopped. No truck across her driveway. No garbage in the flower bed. No cigarette butts near the begonias. No, just a minute. No, right there. No oily little speeches about grace from the man manufacturing inconvenience. Her body took longer to believe the danger had passed. For 2 weeks, she still checked the camera before bed. Still looked through the front window before opening the garage. Still braced ever so slightly every time an engine slowed outside. That, too, is part of the damage done by petty harassment. It is not just the obstruction. It is the anticipation of future obstruction. The small tax collected from your nervous system every day until relief finally feels credible again. Then came the final twist. About a month after the tow, a real estate sign appeared on Grant's lawn. For sale. Small. Tasteful. Devastating. Half the street noticed within an hour. No one commented immediately, which of course meant everyone commented by dinner. Some people pretended there could be any number of reasons. And yes, technically there could. But the timing was so immaculate it practically winked. Brooke began carrying boxes to the garage. The daughter loaded backpacks and lampshades into the rental sedan. Grant was seen less and less, as though the neighborhood itself had become too reflective a surface for him. Mara did not celebrate. Not openly. She was not interested in dancing on the wreckage of someone else's marriage or finances or self-image. Life had already done enough with him. Besides, what soothed her was not the possibility that his world was smaller now. It was the certainty that hers was no longer being squeezed to make room for his behavior. One Saturday morning, Ellen stopped by to drop off a notice about upcoming water line work on the block. She paused by the front bed, looked over the lavender and the stone edge, and smiled in that reserved way competent women do when they allow themselves one molecule of satisfaction.
"It looks like yours again," she said.
Mara followed her gaze. The white begonias had filled out. The rosemary had thickened. The bench sat clean under the small maple shadow. "It does," Mara said. Ellen hesitated, then added, "For what it's worth, that toe is one of the most educational things the street has seen in years. Now that, my friends, is better than revenge. That is infrastructure." Later that evening, Mara stood in the kitchen rinsing a mug when her phone buzzed with a message from Brooke. Just one line. Thank you for not letting him keep doing it. Mara read it twice. Then she replied, I hope the next place feels quieter. Nothing more. Some endings do not need forgiveness. They need distance, clarity, and a closed gate. The day the moving truck finally came, rain threatened but never committed. Brooke directed the movers. The daughter carried framed photos out to the van. Grant moved in and out of the house with the stiff, angry posture of a man who had not yet found a version of events that let him stay heroic in his own mind. Mara watched for less than a minute. Then she went back to her yard. She had one last thing to plant. Celia had brought home a gardenia from the nursery down the road, its leaves waxy and dark, its first white blooms still tightly folded. For the end of hostilities, she had declared. So Mara knelt by the edge of the bed near the porch steps and dug into the softened earth. The soil smelled rich and cool. The roots settled easily. When she covered them and pressed the dirt down around the base, she felt something close at last inside her chest. Not triumph. Something better. Release. Because that was the real point, wasn't it? Grant had believed power lived in the tiny daily trespasses that make another person rearrange her life. A truck in the wrong place. Trash in the right flower bed. A grin at the exact moment someone else starts doubting her own reaction. He thought control meant making himself unavoidable. But in the end, all he really built was a reputation. And what a bleak little monument that turned out to be. He was not remembered as a strong man. Not as a charming one. Not as the easygoing neighbor he so badly wanted to perform. He was remembered as the man who kept blocking a woman's driveway until a tow truck lifted his truck and half the neighborhood watched his ego go with it. That is not power. That is just expensive stupidity. In the weeks after he left, Mara noticed something almost funny. The whole street behaved better. Cars parked more carefully. Trash bins were tucked in promptly after collection day. Even the group chat somehow became less preachy, less smug, less eager to turn common decency into a philosophical debate. It turns out one entitled man being publicly corrected can educate an entire block. Who knew? And maybe Grant learned something. Maybe not. People like him do not always become better. Sometimes they just move, change scenery, and search for a fresh audience. But adulthood teaches a colder and much more useful lesson than fairy tales do. Justice is not always changing the other person. Sometimes justice is making sure they can no longer keep damaging your peace without paying for it. That was what Mara won. Not the argument. Not the group chat. Not even the meeting. She won her mornings back. She won the simple act of opening her garage without a knot in her stomach. She won the right to tend her own flowers without checking first for someone else's leftovers. She won the return of ordinary life, and ordinary life, after sustained disrespect, can feel almost holy. So tell me, my friends, where would your line have been? At the first blocked driveway? At the first bag of trash in the flower bed? Or would you, like Mara, have waited until the evidence was airtight and the tow truck could do the talking for you? Leave your comment. Like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you love stories where patience runs out with style and karma arrives with a hook, a cable, and perfect timing.